You are listening to How to Get Over Your Ex, episode number 350, How to Stop Feeling Like a Failure After Your Breakup. Hello, Bravehearts. I have to say, another good topic or title for this episode might be How to Feel Like Your Relationship Wasn't a Failure. I wonder if I'll retitle it. I don't know. I'm always torn between what would be the best title. I really appreciate when a title matches the content of the episode. Do you know what I mean? So this is about feeling like a failure, but we're having a broader conversation about when you feel like your relationship was a failure or you failed because you chose a partner that you didn't end up with forever. So let's chat about it. How are you doing today? We need to have this conversation. I'm excited to have this conversation. So this all actually came about in a coaching conversation. And it started because we were talking actually about validation, because I teach all about external validation and how that's not truly a real thing, because our thoughts create our feelings. And when we realize that our thoughts create our feelings, we then also realize that what has been happening in terms of like wanting or thinking you need validation from certain people in our lives is that when we get validation from those people, it's just permission to believe certain things. And then everything else becomes very simple because you're like, oh my God, I could be just giving myself permission to believe that now without the validation. You kind of get to understand, hey, when this person agrees with me or says I'm amazing, all that's really happening is I'm believing thoughts about myself that perhaps I don't believe when the outside world isn't telling it to me or giving me evidence of it. And we really need to work on believing those things, even if we aren't getting it from people in that moment or from around us. It reminds me of Breakup Coach Dorothy when I very first started my career. I had to build the belief that I was Breakup Coach Dorothy. I had to believe in Breakup Coach Dorothy before it was any kind of real thing. It wasn't a real, breakup coaching wasn't even a thing. And when I told people about it, it was me believing in it before it was real. And I had to believe it in my brain and validate it myself before I got other people from the outside world on board with me. I hope that makes sense. That's like a total separate mini lesson about external validation. But that whole separate conversation, what was happening was that my client had really realized that she was really wanting validation from others around her for all of her decision making in life, because her brain kept offering up all the times that she went wrong or she chose wrong. And one of those experiences that was kind of quote unquote evidence to her brain for choosing wrong, doing wrong, making the wrong decision was her past relationship to her ex, which we can all resonate with, right? Of feeling like we did something wrong by choosing that person as a partner because we didn't end up with them. Now, she mentioned that in that whole conversation, she had mentioned the kind of concept or the idea that the relationship failed. And it was a huge kind of like ding, ding, ding bell in my brain to bring up and have a much more in-depth conversation about this, because this is something that I see all the time, right? Because they didn't end up together, it therefore was a bad decision. It was a failed relationship. And that's how she was categorizing it that way. But because I know her and I know the scenario that she came from, I'm like, that is not my understanding of your previous relationship. From what I know, you were dating an amazing man. And I asked her, in what ways was that relationship actually a success and not necessarily a failure? And she mentioned to me, that he was the right person at the right time. He was even better than the last partner than she had had before that. She had been in a long-term partnership before him. And this partner was even better than the before partner. And she had dated very intentionally. He had checked off a lot of boxes that she had known about at the time of dating and vetting. And she had actually done a really good job of choosing him. There was so much success in that experience. The part that turned, right? The only thing that happened was that as they continued their partnership, she really began to start gathering more and new information. She realized, oh my God, there is actually something else that I need to add to my list, and this man doesn't have it, but I didn't even know I needed it until I was with someone who didn't have it. Such a big realization, right? For her, this specifically was like a man who could have and handle her emotions. Someone where she could say, hey, I'm feeling X, Y, and Z, and he could hold space for that, and they could work together rather than getting defensive and weird, right? So I kind of compared this to a business because I feel like I have so many business examples now at this point that I'm like, if we correlated this to a business that does launching, like open cart, closed cart performances, where we open something and a bunch of people buy and then we close it and people can't purchase anymore, we would say, okay, this launch went better than before. We actually signed up more people than last time. We even got more aligned people in the door. And we learned that there is a certain demographic we are missing and we want more of. So we get to solve for that in our next launch. And I don't actually think a business owner would consider that a failure. Isn't that interesting? Yet just because the relationship, when we think about this in a relationship context, just because the relationship didn't last until she died, she was considering it a failure. And I know so many of you listening are doing that. And it's just so subjective, my friends, right? So subjective. At what point can we even consider something a success? Think about this specifically for a relationship. At what point can we consider the relationship a success? Is it at engagement? Is it at marriage? Well, guess what? Things go wrong after those 2 points. So at what point is it a success? And then it's so interesting to me because even we could go 50 years into the marriage and we could be considering that a success until it isn't. When in reality, to be honest, I think some situations where people are staying in partnerships and are just locked in, but they're not actually healthy for them, would we consider that a success? Just because the relationship is intact, just because the relationship status is together. But if it's unhealthy for them, if there's emotional or physical abuse happening, are we like, yes, that is a success because they have remained together? No. So I really think we need to get off the paradigm of relationships being a failure or a success at all. They are ever growing, ever learning, ever morphing, always changing, always getting better. And sometimes the best, most successful thing that could happen is a relationship ending or what I like to call completing itself. And listen, I'm not pro leave. I'm not like rah, dump him. It's just in the scenarios where our partner has chosen to leave, I'm kind of like, just because they chose to leave doesn't mean we are a failure. Doesn't mean that we have failed in some way. It doesn't even mean that the relationship was a failure. Okay, so this week, if you've been telling yourself that your relationship was a failure and using that as evidence not to trust yourself moving forward, I'd really ask myself, in what ways was this relationship a success? How was that the right decision at the time? And how is not being together right now the right thing for me? Okay, my beautiful Bravehearts, I hope you have an amazing day. I love you, and I will talk to you next time.